At 4 p.m. on the 21st of September 2001, Aidan Minter was walking along the Thames River in London. As he approached Tower Bridge, he noticed something floating in the river. At first he thought it was a barrel and peered over the bridge to get a better look. Far from a barrel, however, he instead found that it was the headless and limbless body of a child floating away on the Thames with the tide. Linked to both witch doctors and ritualistic sacrificial killings, the police investigation was intense and played heavily with the press to flirt with the public eye. Despite its high profile, leads were as fruitless as they were bizarre, and confirmation of the exact reason for his murder, along with the murderers themselves, have evaded police for the past 16 years. This is Dark Histories, where the facts are worse than fiction. Aidan Minter was a 32-year-old IT consultant working in the bustle of London's busy central hub. At around 4 p.m. on Friday the 21st of September 2001, he was leaving work and making his way home, walking along the Thames and the South Bank in the heart of London. As he approached Tower Bridge, he noticed what he thought was a barrel floating in the river and leant over the railing to take a closer look. To his shock, he found that rather than a barrel, the object he had spotted was in fact a dismembered torso. He called the police, who hurried to the scene and, using a river rescue unit, retrieved what was left of a young boy, dressed only in a pair of bright orange-red shorts and missing all 4 of his limbs along with his head. Detective Inspector Will O'Reilly was amongst the police who helped to fish the body out of the river and would go on to play a leading role in the investigation. He found the whole scene of the child's bloated torso quite distressing. "I'd never seen a child that young dismembered," he said. The body was sent to the Home Office Pathology Unit, where Michael Heath undertook an autopsy. The initial findings were quite simple, but nevertheless included several strange and disturbing facts that hinted at a future for the case that could be more than a little unusual. It was found that the body had probably been placed in the river for up to 10 days prior to the discovery. The body was that of a boy, probably aged between 5 to 10 years old, and was either of African or Caribbean descent. His arms, legs and head had been removed, and the cuts around the neck that removed the head were noted to have been done with quite a high degree of precision. Unusually, the body's blood had been entirely drained. There were some traces of pholcodine, a pharmaceutical found in common cough medicines, in his stomach, and a small amount of unidentifiable organic compound and plant matter in his lower intestine, but otherwise it appeared the boy had not eaten for several days before his death. The brightly coloured pair of shorts had a label with washing instructions printed in German and were made by a brand called Kids Company. It was suggested that the shorts had been put on the body of the boy up to a day after his death. There were no signs of sexual interference, and outside of the removal of the limbs and head, there were no signs of broken bones or other violent blunt trauma. Cause of death was listed as trauma to the neck. In the immediate aftermath, and with not much else to go on, a press conference was quickly called. The police, aware of the shocking nature of the murder even at this early stage, wanted to take the initiative to the press in hopes of leveraging publicity to gain information of the boy's identity. Superintendent Adrian Maybanks told the busy press room, "We've not identified the child, and consequently, we've taken the unprecedented step of giving him the name Adam. Until his family is identified, we will act as his family, and his community will be the community of London. I have not come across anything like this before in my career. This is a highly unusual case. We know very little about who this boy is, but I would like to reassure members of the London community that we will not rest until the person responsible has been apprehended." It was a bold statement to make, and in retrospect, painfully naive. No one could have had any idea quite how far down a dark path the investigation would travel, and for quite how long. Following the initial autopsy, leads and ideas were drying up around the investigation at an alarming rate. There was no one for the police to question, no witnesses, no searches to be made through any databases, as there were no dental records available without a head and no fingerprints without any arms. A search had been ongoing in the Thames to try to find the severed body parts, but had been proving fruitless. The police didn't have any idea as to a motive, and nor were they even entirely sure whether or not the boy had been alive whilst in the UK. Running short on ideas of where to move next, the police moved on to the only scrap of information they had. During the autopsy report, Dr. Heath had mentioned that he thought the cuts and draining of blood could have been ritualistic in nature. Hedging their bets that the boy was of African descent, they flew in a South African pathologist to give them a second opinion. Dr. Hendrik Schultz carried out a second autopsy and came to an altogether more bizarre conclusion for the police. Schultz suggested that the dismembered body resembled those of certain killings in Africa, and in particular one case from 1994, where the body had been dismembered and dumped near a body of water wrapped in an orange-red sheet. That particular case had been proven to be a killing intended to harvest body parts for creating a medicinal concoction in the dark practice of what is known in Africa as muti. The practice of muti, a term deriving from the Zulu word mti, meaning tree, is an African voodoo form of witch doctor magic, harnessing the supposed curative powers of certain parts of plants, animals, and in some deviant circles, even humans. Though the use of human body parts in such concoctions is officially outlawed in Africa, official statistics showed there were muti killings occurring at the rate of 1 in every 2 weeks of a year, and in 1982, there was even an official occult crime unit specifically set up to deal with muti killings. The parts would be dried, crushed and ground by a sangoma, a highly skilled witch doctor. In particular, the genitals and internal organs were highly prized for use in fertility medicines, and brains were high on the list of desirable organs, which would be cooked and eaten to enhance political power and business success. Often the victim of muti murder was kept alive whilst the extraction of the body parts was brutally carried out. It was thought that the louder the victim screamed and the more pain that was suffered, the easier it would be for the voodoo deities to hear the cries, and as such, the more powerful the prized parts would become. Children were valued highly for muti ingredients, as it was believed that they still had a significant portion of the luck allotted to each person's lifetime, and were therefore more lucrative and sought after over adults, who naturally would have already used up a significant amount of their luck as the years of their life had ticked by. After hearing this disturbing new idea for a motive from Schultz, police were naturally shocked and more than a little apprehensive. But in October, after very little other ideas had materialised, and when the search unit still dredging the Thames made the discovery of a bundle of 7 half-burnt ritualistic candles wrapped in cloth close to the Battersea Bridge, they were beginning to find the concept easier to believe. The cloth even had a name on it. Written in black ink was the name printed several times over: Adequajo Fola Adeo. The police called a press conference immediately and appealed for information on the name, and at the same time confirmed publicly that they were following a line of investigation concerning ritualistic murder. This had the desired effect of stirring the press into a frenzy, something the police hoped would aid them in discovering more information on the boy, or rather, any information at all. Despite the initial excitement of the police concerning the name on the sheet, no records were matched in any of the London school databases of a child whose name matched, and finally, several days after the press conference, records of a routine customs check was found that led them to the discovery of Adequajo Fola Adeo. He was, fortunately for him, but less so for the investigation, alive and well and living in his home in New York. He had a sister who lived in London who was questioned and admitted to using the candles in a healing ceremony that she had carried out on behalf of her brother. The police dropped the line of investigation, confident that it was entirely unrelated to the case of Adam. In an effort to gain a handle on the unfamiliar concept of muti and African voodoo, one of the lead investigators on the case, Will O'Reilly, visited Dr. Richard Hoskins in January of 2002. Richard Hoskins was a senior lecturer in African religions at the University of Bath Spa and had commented in the media days previously on the theory of muti killings. Police jumped at the chance to enlist an expert to help them comprehend the situation. It was unfortunate then that, rather than corroborate with the muti motive, as no doubt was the hope, Richard Hoskins instead highlighted several key facts that contradicted everything that he had known of muti killings. Once shown the photographs of the body and after reading the autopsy report, Hoskins pointed out that the genitalia and internal organs were often the most prized body parts harvested in killings usually associated with muti, though in the case of Adam, none had been taken. Furthermore, the precision of the cuts were raising alarms, as in general, cuts and extractions would not have been carried out with much care, partly due to the fact that how the parts were harvested were not usually a cause for much concern, but also due to the belief that the more pain suffered would lead to a more powerful medicinal ingredient. The parts were usually hacked and violently removed, rather than precisely and with care. Thirdly, Hoskins noted that the removal of the limbs was seemingly done after death, another factor that went against the usual practice of muti for the same reasons. The draining of blood suggested to Hoskins that rather than muti, it could have been possible that the murder was instead that of another voodoo practice, that of sacrifice. By February 2002, the investigation had once again completely stalled. However, Hoskins, now employed by the police as an official expert, was developing his theory that the murder had been part of a ritual sacrifice. He had also noted that Adam was circumcised, a practice not entirely common in Africa, and in the regions and cultures that did undertake the practice were often at differing periods of a man's life. This allowed Hoskins to at least hypothesize a general region from where the boy may have grown up and in what culture. As it happened, Adam's circumcision was rare in Africa, but common amongst the Yoruban people of West Africa. The Yoruban believed in a deity named Oloran, and the minor deities, of which there were several hundred, were called orishas. Each individual orisha had favourite colours, metals, stones, food, drinks, plants, and even animals. Hoskins believed that the colour of the shorts and the resting place of the body in the Thames, not exactly an inconspicuous dumping ground by any stretch, was in fact significant and could hint at which deity was being worshipped. One element of worship also carried out by the Yoruban was of course sacrifice, especially when requesting the aid of the Orisha. By May of 2002, he was convinced that Adam had been the victim of sacrifice and cited the intact internal organs and genitalia, the precision of the cuts to remove the limbs, the colour of the boy's shorts and the dumping in the Thames River, along with the fact that the body had been hung upside down to be drained of blood as his basis that sacrifice was to blame in a report he delivered at a conference named the European Ritualistic Killings Conference in The Hague, along with the police investigating the case. The theory of sacrifice ran contrary to the press angle, which was still concentrating on muti. After the conference, there was both shock and a new upsurge in interest in reporting the case, which the press naturally saw as far too juicy to pass up reporting in all manner of sensationalist ways. For the police, this once again had the effect of highlighting the case to the public, which they hoped could shed more light and bring in more leads to a case that was hopelessly stuck in a rut and fast running out of options of inquiry.